The Bush School, the weatherboard and stone one-teacher schools that educated 4 generations of country Australians. The Schoolies, prepared and presented by Hank Nelson.
I was 19 years of age and quite eager to start at this new school. I'd got all new clothes and all. Thought I was just Jackie going out to open a new school. And I liked the idea of the responsibility. Of course, little knowing what I was getting myself into. Well, when I got to the station at Bell, there was this great lanky man, tanned, a truly Australian bushman. And I looked at him and I thought, good Lord. He came to me and he said, "Are you Miss Weck?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, I am the president of your school committee." He kept assuring me all the way out in the ride that he was the president. He escorted me out to a buggy with 2 fierce-looking horses. I'd never been up in a contraption like that before. So I got up into that and he said, "Giddy up, lads, now," and away we took off at a mad gallop. I was hanging on like mad to both sides of the seat. He said, "Oh, you'll be right." So I thought, I hope so.
In the early 1930s, the one-teacher schools were at their height, and at the end of each January, about 2,000 schoolies went to new appointments. Many learnt of the name of their school at an emotional farewell assembly at Teachers' College. Some teachers came equipped with maps. A school known as somebody's soak, tank or bore, such as Claypan's bore or Norlaling's soak, carried its own warning. Corner 2 signalled isolation, Mallee Corner, Overland Corner and McCarty's Corner. But other names held more cryptic signals of location. Some were practical. Lock number 3, Gate 89, Group Settlements 3 and 4, and Austral Gypsum Siding. There were whimsical, Bo Peep, Bugle Hut, Inky Pinky, Snug and Flower Pot. There were soft Aboriginal names, Murna Murna, Mingoola, and the sharp sounds of Tucky Tucky and Patchawallak. There were echoes of distant places, Baghdad, Chicago and Montana, and reminders of places left behind, Highbury, Hollyoak, Cherry Tree Pool and Tipperary. These names were balanced by the Australianness of 5 Mile Tree, Walkaway, Galar, Wattle Flat, Mongrel Downs and Fred's Flats. But if there was one characteristic name among the 6,000 one-teacher schools scattered across Australia, then it ended in Creek, Charlie's Creek, Currency Creek, Mosquito Creek. In Victoria alone, there have been 7 schools called Sandy Creek, 5 back creeks, and there's been Boggy Creek Upper, and 2 Boggy Creek Lowers. For many teachers, the school name was the beginning of a journey into the unknown.
The name of the place was Uglow Station via Condobolin. So we looked it up on a map and we found that there was a place south of Condobolin called Uglow Tank. But I still suspected that it was somewhere not very far south of Condobolin. I was the only one to get off the train. The sky was clear and blue and it rained for about 5 minutes. I don't know why or how. I looked up a long, wide street, tree-lined, and I could see no one at all. And eventually a station master or attendant came out and I asked him, I told him I wanted to go to Uglow Station and he said, "Well, you better go to the taxi rank," and he directed me. And I went down the long empty road for about 150 yards and of course my impression of the place was it was almost totally deserted, and I turned the corner and there in fact was the main street where there was a little activity on a Saturday morning. So that pleased me. And then I went to the taxi rank and I said I wanted to go to Uglow Station. I was lugging 2 very large suitcases and he said, £5. And luckily I think I had about £5 2 shillings, and £5 was a fairly large sum for me, I suppose for anyone in those days, so that gave me an inkling of how far out it was. And so off we went, and Uglow Station was a left-hand turn at the 28-mile peg, and I remembered that there was nothing much south. Anyway, Uglow Station was there and I got out and all these dusty-looking people came up to me and said, "Hello, who are you?" And I told them. And I was looking around, hopefully, and I could see buildings, 100 yards, 150 yards from where we were, the station house. So I hopefully asked where the school was and they pointed off westerly direction and said 7 miles that way. So that's arrival at Uglow Station, which was the largest property in the area.
Walpole number 2 was reached by travelling on the Albany Express. I didn't get there till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was a horse and cart throwing a mail bag on, and the railway staff were walking off to their barracks. There's nothing else around. The place was called Nornalup, and Walpole was still 7 miles further, so I thought, now how do I get to Walpole? So I approached the chappie that was loading a mail bag onto the spring cart. He took me out then 7 miles to Walpole on the horse and cart, and he was interested in what I was doing, and I was interested in what he could tell me about the place. And at about 10:30, 11:15, the spring cart pulled up, and the gentleman pointed in the direction of the outline of a humpy through the trees, through the carry trees. He said, "That's where the teacher stays, over there." So I got my case and my guitar, and I approached this building, and I fell over a fallen tree trunk and rattled the things. And there were no lights in this humpy, and a dog came barking out, and then another dog. There were dogs everywhere, barking away, and then a voice called out from the side, "Is there anybody there?" I said, "Yes, it's the new teacher. I've been sent from Perth." "We weren't expecting any teacher. Hang on till I tie the dogs up." So the dogs were duly tied up and the lights went on, and I was brought in, and that was my welcome after having travelled 24 hours to get to my destination.
Having arrived at a railway siding or climbed from the mail cart to stand on some dusty road, the teacher's immediate concern was to find somewhere to live. In the classroom, the teacher could hope to be in control, but often the community decided where the newly arrived teacher would live, and the division between the culture of the community and of the teacher was likely to be at its greatest in the boarding house, not in the school.
Family wouldn't send their children to school, so they had written to the Education Department for correspondence lessons. The Education Department then wrote to me and asked me why these children were not attending school. I had then approached the father of the children, 4 children, and then he abused me. And was I so innocent that I didn't know where I was living and what conditions I was living? And I suggested, well, it was a little crude, but, that's got nothing to do with the school and the children attending school. Then he didn't go any further with what he had to say. So I got then a letter from the Education Department, a telegram as a matter of fact, to meet the inspector at Walpole. So I got a ride and horse and cart again into Walpole and met the inspector. He arrived on the back of the truck with the mail, and we went over then to the tea rooms, and he looked at me and rather, with some loaded sort of questioning as to where I was staying and what I was doing and this, that and the other. I said, I have to share a room with a 15-year-old lad that hasn't changed his socks since I've been there and hasn't had a wash. The water supply of 4 44-gallon drums on each corner of the humpy. And I said, it is very crude. You wanted a bath. Well, the bath is in a tin tub behind a hanging sack just off the kitchen table. So there's no privacy whatsoever. Oh, he says, now come on, you're not that innocent. I said, well, what is there to me to tell you? Then he showed me the accusation of a letter that had been sent explaining that the teacher was, these children were not going to be sent to school where the teacher lived in a house of ill repute. Well, I knew nothing about that. So he said, how soon can you close the school? I said, well, it's Tuesday today. I suppose I could be on the train on Friday. He says, well, do that and report at the department. So that was the end of that appointment. So when I got to Perth, my next appointment was at Yandanuka.
I boarded about half a mile away on a small farm, a very small wooden house, and I had 4 little girls, 3 of whom shared my bedroom. There was no possibility of any private room because it just simply wasn't big enough. It was only a little 4-roomed house. And it was there that I had my most embarrassing moment, because they sent a questionnaire out from the union asking about accommodation. And I answered truthfully. There wasn't any bathroom. There was just a corded off area of a gravel veranda, and used to take a tub in of an afternoon. And when the baby arrived, they used to send the baby in too for the amusement for the afternoon, kept her amused for 10 minutes, putting little cold hands down my back. And the inspector of the day came to me very agitatedly and said that the union has contacted me and said that your accommodation is substandard. We'll have to close the school if you can't find other accommodation. So he said, is it as bad as it? I said, well, I've told the truth. I'm not complaining. And he said, well, I don't want to go up and see the lady. It's most embarrassing for me. And I said, it's embarrassing for me too. So he said, well, what can we do? So we put our heads together, and there was another place I could have gone, but I would have had to be very careful to lock my door every night, because Daddy was a little bit of a sugar daddy. So I explained this the best I could, and he said, well, that wouldn't be suitable either, would it? So what we did, we cheated. We put that address down, but I remained where I was for the 8 years. So that was my last most embarrassing moment, I can assure you.
In the 1930s, middle-class Australians from the towns were frequent users of the bath or shower. Country people, especially those in dry areas, were not. And it was often when they went to have a bath that teachers suddenly became aware of differences in their lives and those of their hosts. Some teachers didn't realise they were privileged when they were allowed into the weekly tub after the kids had used the water, but before Mum and Dad. But most teachers have fond memories of generous country homes, large meals, cakes and cream, and being taken to dances and tennis. All new teachers were anxious for their first look at their school. Even if it wasn't the ideal of bright paint, sunlit windows, wattles in bloom and a creek flowing by, they felt a strong sense of possession, and many schools were less than the ideal.
It was real frontier teaching. The only thing I had that the teacher who opened that school didn't have in 1909 was a motor car. And it was a pretty broken down motor car at that. I mean, he had a horse and buggy. We had power of a sort, but it was our own little generator, and really it'd have been better off with oil lamps. But physically, the building, everything about the place was exactly the same. Wood stove, old copper. In fact, it was falling to pieces. I mean, he had it better because it was new. I mean, it was a little tiny attached classroom and 3-roomed residence.
When I got there, there was a huge pile of packing cases with all teaching aids in it, boxes of chalk, maps, blackboards, roll books, record books of every kind. It was, that's all. Oh, there was for water, no running water, of course, just the rainwater. One toilet that served for the teacher, for the boys and for the girls. You had to pick your time, believe me.
The room was quite small, and there was a sort of lean-to room behind it where the children ate their lunch if it was wet or, too cold or too hot and so forth. They had a little garden. The children used to help with the garden. And we weren't cramped, really. I had a high desk with a lift-up lid to put the things in and a high stool. And we had problems with it. There were rats under the school. So when the children went home and I was perhaps writing up things or something, I'd keep a broom near and put my seat round the stool for high up because of the rats.
It was on the confluence of the Lachlan and the Murrumbidgee River. Pretty weird old school. It was a tent on a wooden frame with an iron roof. And I remember the same inspector, ringing me up from Balranald one day, and I got a call to the post office, which was 100 yards from the school, and I had to leave the kids on their own. And he said, "What are you doing today?" I said, "I'm at school." He said, "You're bloody mad." He said, "I was coming out to see you today," but he said, "I'm not going out in that heat." It was 124. He said, "Lock the door and go home." Well, I didn't do that because there was no point. Home was a tent anyway, on a wooden frame with an iron roof, the same as the school was. so I stayed.
Ida Standley opened the Alice Springs School in 1914, and she retired from there in 1929. In 15 years of lonely teaching, she was not once visited by an inspector. But it was only the most isolated schools that escaped supervision. In 1910, Mr. District Inspector Smith reported that his region in southwest Queensland was equal to the size of France, and during the year he had travelled 18,000 kilometres to visit 113 schools. He had travelled by train, coach, buggy, sulky and car. The inspector had great power over the bush teacher, and he was often the only direct link with the profession and the bureaucracy. Most teachers knew when the inspector was on his way.
I had had prior warning to his coming because I had a friend in the school before, Marge Fennell. She was at Coringa North. That's another little country school between Bell and my school. And she rang the home, a party line it was. She rang the home where I was staying and said, he's on his way. That was all. I had to guess what it was. He's on his way. So when he arrived, we all were lined up and greeted him, and I had the children told the boys to doff their caps, their hats, and the girls to bow their head to the inspector. And he came up the stairs, and I saw him looking under the stairs. I had started a little garden with the children, and even in the report he put, rarely have I seen finer violets. It was the climate that did it, you see. But however, he was pleased. So we started off on the right foot. And so then he said, well, now I'd like you to give a geography lesson. So I kept saying, well. I think it was nerves that made me say that. And he said, why the well, Miss Wicker? I said, well, that's how I'm hoping this lesson will go. And he said, he just smiled and said, yes, well, carry on.
I was told the inspector would be arriving the week ending such and such. On Monday morning, a car pulled up outside and a chap got out and pulled his bonnet up. I went out to him and said, may I help you? And he said, I think the car's boiling. So I said, well, I shall go and get you some water. I went round the side of the school and filled a bucket up with water, and I came back and he was not to be seen. I looked through the window and there he was inside talking to the kids. That's how I met the inspector.
So he must have written, he couldn't ring me, there was no telephone. He must have written and said he would call on a certain day with the gentleman in question, and so that, please would I be prepared. Well, of course, that meant you had a vase of flowers on the table and the children primed, and that we were to have an illustrious visitor. But my children there were very friendly, very outgoing, and as he chatted to them a little, because it wasn't an inspectoral visit, it was a friendly visit, it came that we were having a party on Friday because it was my birthday and it was one of the children's birthdays, and we always celebrated together. So the children said, could you not possibly come because we'll have cake, you know. So he said, well, I couldn't come unless I had a formal invitation. Oh, we'll send you a formal invitation, they said. So when he went, he thanked me and goodbye and one thing and another. So the children said, we'll send you one, those invitations. So they tizzied up a little bit of paper and little pictures on it, wrote a formal invitation, and they were formal in those days. You know, the school has the pleasure in inviting and sort of thing. And I thought, oh, well, it's only a stamp, I'll send it off. But, you know, the dear sent me a congratulatory telegram and a book for the little boy that had his birthday. I thought that was delightful of him, because he must have had loads of schools he visited.
I always received a notification of the arrival of a district inspector. Always. It might be short notice, but I always received it. The only type that I had, the only trouble I had was an inspector who had been a footslogger in the First World War and who insisted on sitting at my desk with his feet up on the table. He insisted on sitting at my table with his feet up on it like that while he inspected the school.
The teacher was often expected to be secretary of the tennis club in summer and the football club in winter, and to be able to calculate the volume of water in an odd-shaped dam. Most teachers were integrated into the community. They had both a practical and social function. But there was always a chance that the teacher would be drawn into local feuds or become the target of malice or greed or random madness.
I was a bit young, really, to realise what was going on. We knew there was something going on, but what there was, the actual extent of it, we didn't read until much later in such lurid papers as The Truth, in which he was alleged to have pinched the backside of one of the residents' wives at a party, and consequently he was supposed to have been demanded to tender an apology, which was tantamount to blackmail. If he didn't apologise, certain things would happen, and these things did happen. They apparently took justice into their own hands, and it is alleged that the lady, who was for weeks trained to shoot out of a shotgun by putting up targets on posts, even on the school gate post, and shooting at it with a shotgun, and this was all during school hours, and we knew things were at a tension point, and then suddenly he was shot one night by an intruder on the front veranda. He'd heard the noise on his front veranda, went out to investigate, and turned round and said to his wife to bring a light. He couldn't see. There was someone there, but he couldn't see, and then this shot rang out and he was shot. And he was blinded, actually, by the shot, and it did injure his eye. And then here they were, virtually isolated by the nearest house was about a mile away, and Mrs. Chapman could scarcely drive the car. In fact, her young son, who was only then about 10 or 12, drove the car up to the post office to ring the doctor, and she then turned around and took him into hospital, into the Goulburn Hospital in the car. Meanwhile, of course, all the police were brought out and they investigated, and they arrested the man, but he had rung the post office at the hour of shooting to check the time on his telephone. So it proved that he was 3-4 miles away at his home, and so he was acquitted of the charge. And they didn't bring charges against his wife, who was undoubtedly the lady dressed up in his boots. It was a wet night, and there were footprints there, and they were his boots. Or the footprints were, plaster cast were taken, and they did correspond with his boots. But they didn't charge the wife for some unknown reason, and things were just allowed to fizzle out.
That was a New South Wales case of 1930. When the teacher recovered from his gunshot wound, the Education Department shifted him to another school. The parents of his old school gave him a send-off, a wallet of notes and a silver and oak tray, and danced till the early hours. Some at least thought him worthy of public thanks. Teachers were as likely to be agents of good fortune as they were to be victims of anger.
To get on holidays, I had to go many, many miles by dirt roads. They had no made roads over there. And I had an old car that I christened Old Faithful. And Old Faithful and I, we chugged along, went along quite well, quite happily, until towards evening there was a fierce storm brewing, and down it came in buckets. And I could see that Old Faithful had had enough. It was slipping and sliding everywhere. So when I saw this light up on the hill, right away out in the middle of nowhere, I made towards it. And when I got there, a fierce-looking man grabbed me and pulled me inside, and he said, "Thank God you're here." He said, "My wife's gone into early labour and the phone's out with this storm." Now, I'd never acted as midwife before, so I felt like racing back into the storm. But they looked so nervous and afraid that I thought, no, I'll stay and take charge. So I said, all right, come on then, we'll do our best. So he calmed down, and he became very helpful in helping to calm they were just a young couple, helping to calm his young wife down. He boiled up the kettle and antiseptic. He dipped the threads that I was to tie the cord with. He dipped the cloths. He really was very helpful. And later on, he helped with the delivery of his healthy young son, I'll forget that. And he was so thrilled, and so was she. So we managed, and by, after I'd got her settled down comfortably, and the babe she fed the babe, and they saw me off, and I slid on my way, and when I got to the first decent-sized village, I alerted the doctor there and the ambulance, and of course everybody hopped to attention. But you see, the phones being out, they'd had no previous word of this, so of course they went out and everything was all right then.
In this program, The Schoolies, in the Bush School series, you heard the voices of Olive Durden, Keith Lawler, Walter Gable, Joy Bartlett, Cliff Green, Harold Rees, Terry Seary and Albert Spear.